He stood at the altar like a man born for it. Back straight, smile polished, tuxedo tailored just right. He looked so much like me, or at least I thought he did. My heart swelled with something between pride and fear, the kind of fear that feels like déjà vu. But I brushed it off. I had paid for it all. Every chair, every centerpiece, every plate of overpriced salmon. I even upgraded the venue, said he deserved something elevated. Because that's what fathers do, right? They give, they sacrifice. They stay quiet. My seat was near the back. Not with family, not with friends, just there. A silent observer. No name card. No mention in the program. But still, I smiled. A few people nodded at me politely, like I was someone's distant uncle, like I didn't pour 2 decades of my life into that man at the altar. I checked my tie, straightened my cuffs, kept breathing, because men don't fall apart, not in public. The ceremony began. Music swelled. Her family sat up front, glowing, whispers of beautiful couple, perfect match, but not a single mention of me. No, his father did a great job. No, he's just like his dad. Only silence. I had rehearsed a toast. Nothing dramatic, just something honest, kind. I wasn't asked to give one. Her father did instead. He spoke about love, strength, guidance, all the things I had given, but none of the credit. That was the first sting. The second came during the slideshow, photos from childhood, first steps, birthday hats, graduation. But something was off. A missing face. Mine. I wasn't in a single picture, not at the hospital, not at Christmas, not at the school plays I never missed. It was like I'd been edited out, like history had been rewritten by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I looked around. No one seemed surprised. That's when I felt it. The shift. A slow, creeping suspicion pressing against my ribs. There were too many gaps, too many glances, too much tension, and no one was saying a word. The bride smiled at me once. It wasn't warm, it wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who knows something you don't, and isn't afraid you'll find out. She turned away before I could even nod. My hands were cold. The champagne in my glass untouched. The toast ended with applause. He laughed, clinking glasses, hugging her parents, laughing with old friends. He never looked back at me, not once. He stood at the altar like a man born for it. Back straight, smile polished, tuxedo tailored just right. He looked so much like me, or at least I thought he did. My heart swelled with something between pride and fear, the kind of fear that feels like déjà vu. But I brushed it off. I had paid for it all. Every chair, every centerpiece, every plate of overpriced salmon. I even upgraded the venue, said he deserved something elevated. Because that's what fathers do, right? They give, they sacrifice, they stay quiet. My seat was near the back, not with family, not with friends, just there. A silent observer, no name card, no mention in the program. But still I smiled. A few people nodded at me politely, like I was someone's distant uncle, like I didn't pour 2 decades of my life into that man at the altar. I checked my tie, straightened my cuffs, kept breathing. Because men don't fall apart, not in public. The ceremony began. Music swelled. Her family sat up front glowing, whispers of beautiful couple, perfect match, but not a single mention of me. No, his father did a great job. No, he's just like his dad. Only silence. I had rehearsed a toast. Nothing dramatic, just something honest, kind. I wasn't asked to give one. Her father did instead. He spoke about love, strength, guidance, all the things I had given, but none of the credit. That was the first sting. The second came during the slideshow, photos from childhood, first steps, birthday hats, graduation. But something was off. A missing face. Mine. I wasn't in a single picture, not at the hospital, not at Christmas, not at the school plays I never missed. It was like I'd been edited out, like history had been rewritten by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I looked around. No one seemed surprised. That's when I felt it. The shift. A slow, creeping suspicion pressing against my ribs. There were too many gaps, too many glances, too much tension, and no one was saying a word. The bride smiled at me once. It wasn't warm, it wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who knows something you don't and isn't afraid you'll find out. She turned away before I could even nod. My hands were cold. The champagne in my glass untouched. The toast ended with applause. He laughed, clinking glasses, hugging her parents, laughing with old friends. He never looked back at me. Not once. The thread was short, only a few lines, but enough to rip years apart. It was between him and her, the bride. She wants to tell him after the wedding. He had written. Another message followed. He deserves to know, eventually. And then her reply, your real dad didn't even show up. You don't owe the man who raised you anything. I stared at the screen, fingers frozen, jaw locked. I scrolled up, more messages, weeks of them, talking about keeping things quiet, not wanting to ruin the mood, referring to me as the man who thinks he's the father. I felt my stomach twist, my throat close, and then came the final blow. A message from my son. I'll deal with it after the honeymoon. He's just a guest anyway. Guest. Again that word, like a knife twisted twice, like I never belonged. I backed away from the sink, still gripping my phone. My heart was pounding, not from rage, but from the weight of something collapsing, years of trust, of loyalty, of blind love. I opened my wallet, pulled out the photo I still carried. Him, age 6, holding a toy truck, missing front teeth, smiling like I was his whole world. I remembered that day. I bought that truck after working a 12-hour shift. I sat on the edge of the sink, tried to breathe. But the truth kept tightening around me. He knew. They knew. Everyone. Except me. And that hurt more than any betrayal. Not the biology, not the DNA, but the lie. The silence. The shared decision to let me play father until I had nothing left to give. Then cut me out without a word. I left the restroom slowly. Avoided eye contact. People were laughing, posing for photos. The music played on, like it wasn't built on my paycheck. Like it wasn't my story being buried in plain sight. Her father gave another toast. He called me a supporter. Said I was kind enough to help with the venue, like I was some distant sponsor, like I hadn't given everything. I stared at my son. He didn't look away, but he didn't look ashamed either. I walked out the back door, didn't say goodbye, didn't make a scene. I just left, like a man dismissed from a life he spent decades building. The night air was cool, but my skin burned. I sat in my car, didn't turn the key, just stared at the steering wheel, thinking, feeling everything and nothing. There were no tears. Just a quiet cracking sound inside my chest, the kind that doesn't echo, but changes everything. I looked down at my hands, calloused, old, tired, but not empty, not anymore. I drove back to the hotel, didn't answer the texts, didn't check the missed calls. I sat on the bed, tie still tight around my neck, shoes still polished, and opened my laptop. There was one thing left to do. I opened the deed to the honeymoon gift, a cabin in the mountains, fully paid, fully theirs, or at least it was. I deleted the transfer, cancelled the title, closed the tab, then the bank account, joint wedding expenses, a silent account I created just to surprise them. I emptied it, back to mine, no explanation, just a withdrawal of presence. They had withdrawn love long ago. I was just matching the balance. I typed one email to the travel agent. Please cancel the honeymoon reservation. Do not contact the couple. Refund to original cardholder. Thank you. Then I sat still. Let it all settle. Not revenge, not pettiness, just correction. The kind that comes when a man realizes he's been written out of his own life. I took off my tie, loosened my collar, looked in the mirror. There I was, still standing, still breathing, still worth more than a title I never asked to lose. The door didn't slam. It whispered shut, and with it decades of weight left my chest. I stood there for a moment, hands still on the doorknob, not in grief, in confirmation. I wasn't empty, I wasn't lost. I was just done. Done asking to be acknowledged. Done being a background character in a life I helped build. Done bleeding for people who didn't feel the stain. I walked through the living room slowly. Each step echoed more solid than any conversation I'd ever had with him. The space didn't feel hollow, it felt clean. Like the aftermath of a storm that leaves behind air, you can finally breathe. I inhaled deep. I poured a glass of wine, not to numb, to celebrate, not him, me, the version of me that survived his silence, his comfort in my invisibility. I stepped out onto the porch. Same view, different man. A man who no longer waits for the phone to ring. A man who no longer needs to be needed to know his worth. A man reborn in solitude. The wind brushed against my face, and it didn't carry regret. It carried release, because healing isn't loud, it's not dramatic. It's the quiet decision to no longer open the door to what tried to erase you. I pulled out the old rocking chair. The one I never used because I was always too busy doing. Tonight I sat in it, leaned back, let it creak beneath the weight of peace I hadn't known in decades. It held me. I watched the stars come out slowly. No music, no noise, just the hum of existence. I wasn't part of anyone's fairy tale anymore. But I also wasn't waiting outside the castle gates. I had built my own door, and it closed perfectly behind me. He texted again the next morning. "Dad, can we talk?" I didn't answer, because he still didn't understand. He still thought this was a moment, a phase, something I'd snap out of. But I was already free. By noon, a call came. Through, then another, then a voicemail. "Please, I know I hurt you, but we can fix this." No, we can't, not because I hate him, but because I finally love myself. I sat with the message for a while, listened to his voice shake. He was scared now, not because he lost a father, but because he lost the version who never said no. He missed the silence he used to fill with his comfort. There was a time I would have driven across states to meet him halfway. Now I wouldn't walk to the mailbox if the letter had his name, not because I'm bitter, because I'm done. With begging, with bleeding. The world didn't fall apart without him. My lungs didn't stop. My thoughts didn't collapse. My value didn't disappear. He didn't carry my worth. He just carried my silence. And now that I'd taken it back, he had nothing left to hold. I opened the windows again, let the breeze move through the space he used to take up in my mind. And it didn't hurt anymore. Not like before. Not like absence. It felt more like peace making room for something new. I made a list that afternoon. Things I wanted to do, not because they'd make me feel useful, but because they'd make me feel alive. Visit the coast, buy a bike, start painting again. Maybe even fall in love with being alone. Because being alone isn't punishment. It's honesty. It's the freedom to breathe without bracing for rejection. To sit at a table and not set a second plate just in case someone might finally show up. The phone buzzed again. That night, another voicemail. I didn't listen. I just deleted it. Not out of spite, but to make space for the silence that had finally learned how to speak. I woke up before the sun. No alarm, no agenda, just peace. The kind that doesn't demand anything from you. I made coffee slowly, watched the steam rise, and smiled at the quiet. The phone sat face down, unbothered, muted. It was still. Like the part of me that once craved answers had finally gone quiet too. I didn't need to be needed anymore. I just needed to be. I walked into the spare room, the one filled with memories, and I cleared the shelf, took down the awards I paid for, the photos I framed, the pieces of a role that no longer belonged. To me, I made space, not out of anger, but because I was ready to see new things, things that reflected who I was now, not who I tried to be for him. A father? Yes, but not at the cost of my entire self. That afternoon I took a walk, felt the breeze on my face, watched kids play in the park, watched couples laugh on benches. But I didn't feel envy. I felt grounded, present. I stopped at a local cafe, ordered something I'd never tried, sat by the window, read a book. No one interrupted, no one needed anything from me. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about that. The barista smiled when I left. "See you again?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it because I was finally living a life that didn't revolve around being forgotten. I was living a life that made space for joy. That night, I lit 2 candles. One for who I had been, one for who I was becoming. I didn't cry, I didn't mourn, I just honored both and kept moving forward. I didn't erase the past. I just stopped letting it dictate the future, stopped letting it knock every time I sat down to rest. Now, when silence comes, I invite it in, not as a punishment, but as proof of healing. The following week, I joined a community art class. Nothing formal, just people meeting once a week to create something with their hands, instead de segurar o que nunca foi deles. I sat at a table with strangers who didn't know my story, and that was the beauty. They saw me as I was, not as father of, not as the man who paid, just a man holding a brush, trying to remember what it meant to make something just, for the joy of it. One woman sat beside me. She looked over at my work, tilted her head, smiled. "You're quiet," she said. "I've had a lot of noise," I replied. She nodded, didn't ask for more, didn't pry. And somehow, that was the kindest thing anyone had done in years. No curiosity driven by gossip, no sympathy wrapped in control, just space and presence. I hadn't realized how rare that was until it was freely given. At the end of the session, we shared snacks and stories, not the painful ones, the light ones. The ones that let you laugh without remembering who forgot you. It felt honest, effortless. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee next week. I paused, not from fear, from awe, at how connection could feel like an invitation, not an expectation. I said yes, and it felt easy. That night, I walked home slowly. The wind brushed against my jacket. The stars were out. And for once, I didn't feel like I was walking away from anything. I was walking towards something, not a person, a life. Back home, I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder if he'd called. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, like a quilt I'd sewn myself, thread by thread. From everything they tried to take, I lit 1 candle this time, just one, because I no longer needed to split myself between who I had to be and who I truly was. I was whole, and there was only one flame now, mine. The message came 2 days later, a long one, from him, telling me he had reflected, that he understood more now, that he wanted to rebuild. But the tone hadn't changed, still about his comfort, his timeline. He said he missed me, that he was willing to talk. But what he didn't say was everything that mattered. He didn't say he saw me. He didn't say he took responsibility. He didn't ask what I needed, just what I'd be willing to forgive. I read the message twice, once as a father, then as a man, and the second time I understood what he still didn't. He thought pain could be patched, but this wasn't a tear. It was a quiet exit. I didn't respond, not because I was punishing him, because I was protecting me. Sometimes silence is the final act of self-respect. Not everything broken needs to be rebuilt. Some things need to stay down so you can finally stand. I deleted the message, didn't save it, didn't reread it, let it go the same way I let go of waiting at the window, of praying for a name in the program, of hoping for a seat that never came, all gone. That evening I made dinner again, fresh pasta, basil from my own garden, music low, no guests, no speeches, just peace in every bite. Afterwards, I wrote another note in my journal. This one just said, I don't need closure, I need distance. And for the first time, those 2 lines didn't sting. They healed. The next day, I passed by a photo booth downtown, people laughing inside it, and I thought, how many times did I try to frame myself in someone else's picture? Now, I'd rather be unphotographed than invisible. At home, I boxed. The last of the old decorations, things I had held on to because they used to mean something. Now they just meant weight. I dropped them off at the donation center, drove away with the windows down, lighter than I'd felt in years. I woke up early the next day, before the sun, before the phone started ringing again, and it did. 5 missed calls by 7 a.m. First from him, then her, then no one that mattered anymore. They were probably wondering why the hotel said the honeymoon was cancelled, why the cabin was no longer booked, why the flights no longer existed, why the balance was 0. But I didn't owe them that explanation. Not anymore. They had made their decision first. A message came through. Dad, what happened? Emily is freaking out. Was this about the pictures? Still trying to minimize, to reframe the betrayal as a misunderstanding, as if clarity hadn't already arrived. Another message followed. If this is about last night, let's talk. But they didn't want to talk. Not before. Not when they had time to tell me. Not when they whispered behind my back. Not when they could have chosen truth. They only wanted control back. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, out of healing, because once you learn you were never seen as essential, you stop volunteering to be disposable. I had finally learned that. I made coffee, opened the windows, let the morning light in. It touched the edges of the room like it was trying to remind me the world hadn't ended, just a false version of it. The one I was never truly welcome in. I pulled out an old journal, flipped to the back, wrote 2 words. I'm done. Not bitter, not broken, just finished and free. The phone buzzed again. Voicemail. Dad, please, call me. You're scaring me. No. I had been scared for years of not being enough, of not being needed. But now I saw the truth. I had always been enough. They just weren't capable of valuing the man behind the giving. They loved the support. The money, the presence, but not the person. And now that presence was gone, not with a fight, but with a quiet that echoed. And for the first time in decades, I could hear myself again, and I liked the sound. I opened the box from the top of my closet, the one labeled Memories. Inside, drawings, birthday cards, a pair of baby shoes I couldn't throw away. I hadn't touched this box in years, but today felt right. Not to mourn, to release. There was a Father's Day card, crayon letters barely legible, to the best dad ever. I remember the day he gave it to me. He had spilled juice on the envelope and cried, thinking it was ruined. I told him it was perfect, and I meant it. I ran my fingers over the old photos. Him at age 9, holding a trophy. That day, I had skipped work to see him play. I got written up, didn't care. He hugged me tight after the game. Said I was his hero. Was it all a lie? No, it was real for me. And that's what made it beautiful. I loved him fully, without knowing the truth. And that made me more of a father than any DNA test ever could. I placed the photos back in the box, but not with sadness, with honor. I had been there. I had shown up, even when no one clapped, even when I was left out of the slideshow. I was there. There's power in knowing you gave everything, even if they pretended you didn't, even if they rewrote the story, even if they tried to replace you, because truth, it never really disappears. It just waits for you to see it. Picked up an old toy truck, scratched and faded. He loved that thing, used to carry it everywhere. He once told me he wanted to drive a real one like it someday. I said, "Then I'll teach you." And I did. I smiled, softly, not at the memory, at the man who lived through it all and still had the strength to walk away now. Not in anger. In wisdom, I closed the box, put it back on the shelf, not to forget, but to leave the past where it belonged. I wasn't erasing anything. I was just freeing myself from the weight of being forgotten. I sat by the window again. Same view, same sky. But it looked different now. Like it wasn't closing in on me anymore. Like it was opening, inviting, mine. I looked around the house. Everything in it had been built with someone else in mind. The couch he loved, the shelves I filled with books he never read, the kitchen table where I sat waiting for calls that never came. But now, all of it was mine. Every chair, every quiet corner. I moved through each room slowly, not like a man, lost, but like someone returning, to himself, to the life he had placed second for too long. The photos on the wall. I took some down, not out of spite, out of clarity. There was no anger anymore, just space and peace, the kind that makes you want to breathe deeper, to take up room in your own story, to sit at your own table without asking if you're allowed. I lit a candle that night, just for me. Dinner was quiet, one plate, one glass, no phone, no expectation, just flavor. Just presence, just this moment. I thought about calling him. Not to accuse, not to confront, just to say I knew. But the truth is, I didn't want to hear excuses. Didn't want another version of the story he had already rewritten. Instead, I wrote in my journal. The last line read, "I am no longer waiting to be seen by people who refuse to look." That felt final and right. Not dramatic, not defensive, just real. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no tossing, no questions echoing in my chest. I didn't wake up to check my phone. I didn't replay anything. I just slept, and that felt like a beginning. The next morning, I brewed my coffee slowly, took it to the porch, watched the wind move through the trees. There was a stillness inside me that I hadn't felt in decades. Like I had stepped out of a costume I never agreed to wear. And in that stillness, a question came. Who am I? When? I'm not giving everything away. Who am I when I stop shrinking to fit someone else's version of me? The answer wasn't clear, but the freedom to ask, that alone was already healing. The mailbox held 2 letters that morning, one from the venue confirming the cancellation, the other from the caterer, a leftover invoice addressed to the groom's sponsor. I smiled, tore it in half. No one calls me Dad in that story. Not anymore. Just guest. Supporter. The man who signs the check but never gets mentioned in the speech. I had lived too long in footnotes. Time to write a new chapter. I started with the garden. Weeds pulled, soil turned. Fresh herbs planted, not because he liked basil, but because I did. It felt right. It felt like mine. Then the spare room, cleared it out, boxed up things that no longer had meaning, gave away what didn't carry memory, kept only what reminded me of who I was before I became just his father. That man was still here, still breathing. I called an old friend from work. We hadn't spoken in years. He answered, surprised. We talked for over an hour, laughed about things that had nothing to do with pain. It felt like sunlight pushing through a window that had been shut too long. Later that week, I invited 3 neighbors for dinner. Nothing fancy. Just good food, good conversation. No one asked what happened. No one brought up the wedding. And I didn't need to explain the empty photo frames. They just enjoyed the meal. The next day, I went to the bookstore. Bought a journal, a novel, and a travel magazine. For years, I'd only bought gifts for others. Now I bought something for myself. The cashier smiled and said, "Starting fresh." I nodded. Exactly. In the evening, I sat by the window, watched people walk their dogs, kids on bikes, old couples holding hands, and I thought, not about what I lost, but about what I still had, and what I had just begun to build. I lit a candle, played soft music, wrote in the journal, "I am not rebuilding from ashes, I am building from wisdom." That night I didn't dream of him. I dreamed of silence, and it didn't hurt. The knock came at noon, soft, uneasy, the kind that says, "I hope you open." I stood in the hallway, watching his shadow through the frosted glass. He hadn't called first, just showed up. I didn't open right away. I let the silence stretch, let him feel what distance sounds like. When I finally turned the handle, he looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I just looked at him differently now. He offered a half smile. I didn't return it. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. No words, let him enter a home that no longer revolved around him. He looked around, noticed the missing photos, the rearranged furniture. He sat on the couch. Same place he sat as a teenager, the night I told him he could be anything. He glanced at the empty walls. "Where are the pictures?" I stayed standing. "They didn't match the truth," I said. He looked down. "I know you're angry." I didn't nod, didn't deny it. He continued, "I wanted to tell you, I just didn't know how." "That's the thing," I finally said. "You knew. You chose not to." He opened his mouth again, but I held up a hand. "I'm not here for excuses." He swallowed hard. "I never stopped seeing you as my dad. But you let everyone else stop," I said. "That's the difference." He looked away. Silence filled the room again, not heavy, not hostile, just complete. A silence born from boundaries finally built. A silence that didn't invite explanation, only truth. "I want to fix this," he said. I shook my head. "You can't fix what you refuse to acknowledge." He leaned forward. "What do I need to do?" I exhaled slowly. "Grow, without expecting me to shrink again." His eyes watered. Mine didn't. I handed him an envelope. Not money, not answers. Just the last few things he left in my garage. His childhood box, a key I didn't use anymore. His own silence returned to him. He stood slowly, knew it was over, not with hatred, but with finality. He looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry," he said. I didn't answer. He left. The sun rose differently that day, not because the world had changed, but because I had, and for the first time in years, I woke up without a weight on my chest. No questions, no waiting, just peace. I brewed my coffee with care. Not to fill a silence, but to enjoy it. The kitchen felt warm, not because someone was coming over, but because I was finally staying with myself, and that was enough. I stepped outside barefoot. The wind was soft, the way forgiveness feels when it finally lands. I didn't look at my phone, didn't wonder if he'd call. That story was finished, and I was done rereading it, hoping for a different ending. I walked the garden path. The basil had sprouted, and I smiled. Not because it reminded me of anyone, but because it reminded me I still knew how to grow. Even after being buried under years of silence, I lit a candle that night. One flame, one table, one chair. There was no need to set an extra place just in case someone showed up. The only presence I needed now was my own. I pulled out the journal, the one I'd been writing in since the night I walked out of that wedding. I turned to the last page and wrote one final line. I am no longer waiting to be chosen. I already chose myself. Then I closed it, not with sorrow, but with closure. Later, I hosted a small dinner, nothing elaborate, just 3 neighbors and a woman from the art class. There was laughter, easy conversation, and eyes that saw me without needing my history. We raised our glasses, not to the past, but to now, to honest beginnings, to quiet strength. and I offered one toast. To peace that doesn't ask permission, only presence. They smiled. I meant it. After they left, I did the dishes slowly. No rush, no aftertaste of pain. The house didn't echo anymore. It breathed, because I was no longer waiting for someone to fill the space. I sat by the window one last time. That night, the moonlight washed over the garden. I didn't think about what was missing. I thought about what I'd reclaimed. I wasn't someone's background anymore. I was my own story, and for the first time, I was listening.